Good evening to you, Stephen. Thank you very much for your time. We know that there's a SADC extradition treaty between SADC countries, but ultimately Malawian law has to come into play to extradite this couple back to South Africa. But there's undoubtedly a diplomatic angle to all of this as well. It's interesting that the government of Malawi seems to, at this point, have a very hands-off approach to this matter. What do you make of that?
Yes, I think, good evening, Sally. You know, they're going to say it's not really our problem. I think they have to be open to an approach to extradite from South Africa, but they're not going to do the work for our prosecuting service or our police or our home affairs. We're going to have to do all the hard work on the South African side and then go through the formal channels. And I mean, the fact that the two of them have escaped has just made it all the more difficult to bring them to justice, because if they're in your own country, you have jurisdiction. If they're in another country, you know, we've seen how long these things can take and how they can strain relations between the two capitals.
Speaking to a lawyer earlier, he made it clear what the Malawian law says, and that extradition can take a long time, but you know, there's a couple of criteria. You know, the Malawian government or the Malawian justice system would have to be satisfied that the crime they're being accused of in South Africa would be something that they would also try and see as a crime in Malawi. Also, that they'd need to be reassured that they're not going back. They wouldn't be sending their own citizens back to a country that might be prejudiced against them for whatever reason. But also the issue around their safety could actually put a complete halt to this. The Malawian government may be reluctant, or the Malawian justice system might be reluctant to send citizens back to a country where they say they feel completely unsafe. Where does diplomacy come in, and how does it work with the legal system?
Well, the Bushiris have actually made that point, that's why they fled, because they didn't feel safe. And unfortunately, South Africa doesn't always have the best reputation overseas when it comes to ensuring safety. This was an argument that was made, if you remember, in the Shri Diwani case.
Yeah.
Diplomacy means that different governments would have to come to an agreement and negotiate. I think it's made slightly worse in that when the Malawian president, Lazarus Chakwera, was trying to leave South Africa on the weekend, his plane was delayed for 5 or 6 hours. It was subject to searches. They were accusing him of perhaps having the Bushiris in his plane. And that led to a very angry letter that was issued by the Malawian Department of Foreign Affairs to the South African Department, to DIRCO, which, you know, really was outraged at this. And so just that little wrinkle will make it, could make it tricky to smooth everybody's feathers and, as you say, satisfy the legal requirements on both sides of the border.
Because that's certainly one theory that seems to be completely ruled out now. They definitely didn't leave on a presidential plane. Ultimately, when it comes to diplomacy, who's got more muscle? Who needs who more? I would imagine that Malawi needs South Africa more, and that might give South Africa more leverage, but perhaps I'm wrong.
Yeah, one would think so. But of course, the international system recognizes each sovereign state as sovereign, as in control of their own affairs. So, yes, I mean, we export far more to Malawi than we import from them, so one would imagine that the trade is important. South Africa is many, many times the size of Malawi. But Malawi is going to stand up for itself, and it could make things difficult. It could drag its heels. You know, I think there's an embarrassment when it comes to these sorts of cases. They're probably, you know, not going to necessarily play ball and do whatever they can. As we said at the beginning, they've put the ball in South Africa's court to get everything done on our side.
And we know that South Africa has already issued a warrant of arrest for them. What is the role of SADC in all of this? We know about the extradition treaty, but it seems, you know, while that's important, the reality is it's all about Malawian law and diplomacy. Is SADC immaterial in this process ultimately?
Yeah, I'm not sure how it would get involved unless to help enforce the extradition clauses in its statutes. It's not a very active international organization, I'd say, and it's very much dependent on what its member states wanted to do. It doesn't have a lot of independent power apart from what the states do. But I think it may be a site for diplomacy. It may be an area where other countries would want to get involved in some way. But I don't think it's entirely front and center in terms of getting those two fugitives back to South Africa.
Well, thank you very much for your time this evening. We do appreciate it. Stephen Gruzd from the South African Institute of International Affairs.